Now, from CBS 4 News, this is Facing South Florida with Jim DeFede.
Good morning, I'm Jim DeFede, and welcome to Facing South Florida. This week, in a fairly dramatic move, former Broward Sheriff's Deputy Scot Peterson was arrested, well, for cowardice. Now, technically, being a coward isn't illegal, but essentially that's the reason he was arrested. As we all know by now, Peterson was the deputy assigned to Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School when Nicholas Cruz stormed into the freshman building and killed 17 students and staff while injuring 17 others. This morning, we're going to take a closer look at that decision to file those criminal charges. But first, let's get a little bit more background from my colleague, Joan Murray.
Prosecutors say disgraced former BSO deputy Scot Peterson committed a crime when he didn't protect the children in his care at Stoneman Douglas, where he was school resource officer when a gunman stormed the campus, killing 17 students and staff. But criminal charges set a dangerous precedent, according to the head of the deputies union.
If an officer is now making or working a detail and there happens to be children there, does that mean that we're now the caretaker of those children? And when does this actually stop as we go down this slippery slope?
Video shows Peterson took cover while the gunman was still firing. He said he was following procedure.
He broke down, but also on that day, the command staff that was there that day, the captain, the major, and everybody there, they failed in their command presence as well. And once again, the union's concerned that the low-lying fruit is left bearing the brunt of the punishments.
But the parents of the murdered children feel the charges against Peterson are long overdue.
That coward was the only law enforcement officer on campus. He was the only school safety officer with a gun. He got to the front of that building after 1 minute and 44 seconds had gone by. He couldn't have saved my little boy, Alex, but if he would have gone in, he could have saved those 6 people that died on the 3rd floor.
That was CBS 4's Joan Murray reporting. Now, the formal charges against Peterson are 7 counts of child neglect, 3 counts of culpable negligence, and 1 misdemeanor count of lying to investigators. What FDLE in their investigation determined is that Nicholas Cruz fired off about 140 rounds while he was inside the high school, including around 75 rounds after Peterson arrived at the building and decided not to go inside to confront Cruz. The 7 counts of child neglect stem from the students shot during that part of the shooting on the 3rd floor of the school, and the 3 counts of culpable negligence involved the 3 adults shot up there as well. Here is more from FDLE Commissioner Rick Swearingen.
I think when we saw the timeline that day and he stood there for some 45, 48 minutes and did nothing, you know, as law enforcement officers, despite whatever policies and procedures our agencies have, we swear an oath to protect the public that we serve. And I think it says now that you will be held accountable. If you don't do your job, you will be held accountable.
Yeah, is there a difference between cowardice and criminal activity?
There is. There is a difference between cowardice and criminal activity. I think what you found here is there are examples of both.
So the argument made by FDLE and the Broward State Attorney's Office is that Peterson fell under the role of caregiver, and by failing to protect the students, his actions amounted to child neglect. This is a highly unusual argument, and legal experts I've spoken to say they've never heard of a child neglect statute being used in this way anywhere in the country. And Peterson's lawyers said he was surprised he wasn't given a chance to meet with prosecutors before they move forward with their case.
In cases like this, where an individual is not in custody, where it's not a violent crime, that there's usually an opportunity between defense counsel and the prosecution to talk about the nature of the charges and talk about any type of legal defenses or factual defenses the white might have, and to present those to the prosecuting authority for consideration. That consideration never happened, and that consideration should have happened, because if they had told me that they would have are seeking or going to use the child neglect statute, I would have done my research, and I would have argued that the child neglect statute can't be used against my client, that they are overreaching, that these definitions don't apply to my client, and they have no case. But of course they didn't want to hear that. All they wanted to do is take my client into custody unnecessarily so.
Okay, so let's get into this more with my guest. Raimundo Socorro is the Dean of the School of Justice, Public Safety, and Law Studies at Miami-Dade College. He also served as a police officer for nearly 30 years with the City of Miami. And William Barzee is the managing partner of Barzee Flores Law Firm, which specializes in criminal defense work. He practices in both state and federal court. Gentlemen, thank you both for coming in. I think this is a very interesting moment in time that we have here, and I think this is a case that's going to draw a lot of national attention. I want to start with you, Bill, just from a legal standpoint. Give me your assessment from what you think of these charges and how aggressive a use of these statutes are by the prosecutors.
Well, they're an incredibly aggressive use by the prosecutors. In fact, they're really taking a square peg and trying to fit it into a round hole, and that's why you're having the types of questions we have about this case, is because it simply doesn't fit. These statutes were not meant to prosecute police officers for failing to be heroes in a particular situation. They're caregiver statutes. They're for teachers and for parents and babysitters and caregivers of children to make sure that children aren't neglected. They have nothing to do with a case like this, and it's an overreach by the prosecutors to be bringing these charges.
Now, I think we can, I don't think anyone's going to try to defend Scot Peterson necessarily what he did on that morning and failing to go inside. You can have your opinion as to what he should have done, what he did do. Clearly, the parents are very upset. You can understand the parents' anger in this case. But as a police officer for a long time and now sort of teaching criminal justice, how do you process, these charges and what this could do for the future of law enforcement?
So I have a difficult time separating the emotions from the legality of it. Because on one hand, as a father, I think he was a coward and he should have gone in there to save lives. On the other hand, I don't know that this falls into the realm of being a criminal act. So as a police officer, I'd start to wonder, when am I supposed to engage, or when should I not engage? When is it that I have to be worried about getting my freedom taken away from me later on?
And this could have the impact of, if that is weighing on an officer's mind as they approach a scene, they could then make judgments that are not rooted in necessarily good policy, but more out of fear. Is that a concern?
That's a very big concern. They may go while we're trying to enforce officers to use less force, to be less aggressive, to increase their legitimacy further, they may overestimate a situation and actually go that route instead of using restraint.
Right. Here's the issue as I see it. If Scot Peterson had gone in and had taken out Cruz and had risked his own life in doing so, we would all be calling him a hero, right? He would be the toast of the town, the key to the city. We would all be talking about his heroic acts. What the state of Florida is doing now is saying you're a criminal because you did not act like a hero. And that's absurd.
Well, let me push back on you. One of the things that FDLE says in their arrest warrant in the Broward County State Attorney's Office says that he received the training. He understood what he was signing up for. This is the role of a police officer, to place their life in jeopardy if need be, and that as a trained officer, it was his responsibility, his duty to go into that building.
Listen, that's absolutely ridiculous. Scot Peterson is a human being. In order to train a human being to act in that type of a situation with no fear, it takes intensive training. You're talking about the type of training that we give soldiers in the military when they go off to fight wars.
Let's bring the person in who does some of that training. You actually helped train the SWAT teams for active shooter situations when you were at the City of Miami Police Department. Do you, as a police officer, do you expect all of the officers under your command with you at any given moment to say, I'm willing to die, or I'm expecting to die, rather than risk others being killed in wake of my not acting?
I expect them to, yes, I expect them to think that way and to feel that way. However, I do understand that as a human being, the training that Scot Peterson received, which was one in 2016, 2 years before the incident, and none in between the incident and 2016, was woefully inadequate. And the reason is we all have this intrinsic fear of situations like that. And if you don't train continuously, you don't train yourself to override that fear.
Yeah, it's fine. I'm looking at some of the notes that I have. You know, there's this great quote from John Jay College, one of the deans over there, and he's talking about that you know, he's never seen a case like this anywhere. He thinks that this is incredibly irresponsible. You know, obviously there are those who are going to defend the decision, but one of the things that I thought stood out, and this is a quote from, again, that professor from John Jay College, Criminal Justice in New York. Police are civilians with guns and very basic training and have proven time and time again that their skills are not very reliable with firearms. The notion that American police, with some exceptions, have the capacity to turn into commandos in the middle of a mass casualty shooting is not bordered by reality. Would you agree with that?
100%.
Absolutely. And now what are we going to do? Are we going to ask Mrs. O'Malley, the third grade English teacher who the state legislature wants to arm? Are we going to expect her to do the same thing? Are we going to expect her to be a hero and to take a gun out into a hallway and track down a shooter? I mean, this is absurd. I get the need, the human need to find meaning in this and to hold those responsible accountable. I get that, but what are we talking about? Who's accountable here? Certainly Cruz is. Certainly the state of Florida is for failing to get him the mental health counseling that he needed. Certainly the state of Florida for allowing an unstable 19-year-old boy to run around legally with an AR-15. I mean, this is the absurdity here. This is what we should be talking about, not the fact that some civilian who happens to put on a police uniform in the morning didn't live up to our expectation that he's Bruce Willis in Die Hard and going in and taking people out like some kind of a hero. All
right, let's take a break here. We'll go to a commercial, come back. I want to discuss this further. I want to talk a little bit more about training. I also want to talk about how this case could actually have an impact on the state's decision to remove Scott Israel as sheriff. So we'll continue with this discussion when we come back right in a minute.